President Biden is selling his domestic agenda to the public in Michigan as he tries to shift the focus away from the price tag and onto what's actually in the bills. He spoke this afternoon in the city of Howell at a training facility for a local trade union.
I want to set one thing straight. These bills are not about left versus right, or moderate versus progressive, or anything that pits Americans against one another. These bills are about competitiveness versus complacency. They're about opportunity versus decay. They're about leading the world or continuing to let the world pass us by, which is literally happening. To support these investments is to create a rising America. America is moving. To oppose these investments is to be complicit in America's decline.
It follows a series of virtual meetings between the president and Democratic lawmakers. The party is trying to hash out a framework for his social and climate proposals. The White House is pushing for a price tag between $1.9 and $2.2 trillion over the next decade. This comes after moderate Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema rejected the $3.5 trillion price tag progressives had been seeking. Now, it's important to note that this spending would take place over 10 years. It's a fraction of the nation's annual spending on expenditures like defense, Social Security, and Medicare. Meanwhile, the fight over the debt ceiling continues on Capitol Hill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says the chamber will hold a procedural vote Wednesday on debt limit legislation, which already passed in the House. That would suspend the debt ceiling until December of 2022, staving off a potential U.S. default.
Once again, the members of this body will face a choice. We can bring this Republican-manufactured debt ceiling crisis to a swift end, or Republicans can keep barreling our country ever closer to the first default in American history. By now, it's perfectly clear which political party is working to prevent a default on the debt and which party is deliberately and almost cynically rooting for one.
For more, let's bring in Nicholas Wu, Nandita Bose, and Philip Bump. Nicholas is a congressional reporter for Politico. Nandita is a White House correspondent with Reuters, and Philip is a national correspondent at The Washington Post. Welcome. Happy Tuesday to you all. Nicholas, before we dive into the news on this legislation, what is the latest on that suspicious car outside the Supreme Court?
Well, at this moment, we don't actually know a whole lot about this. The Capitol Police have declined to provide that many details about this incident, including any potential motive of the person who had parked their car. All we know is that this person had appeared to have illegally parked and had declined mostly to engage with Capitol Police until it appears they used a flashbang grenade or some other kind of device to do what basically police said disrupt the driver, and then they what was basically a SWAT team hauled the person out of his car and arrested him. And so, we're still waiting on a lot of details here, and we'll be keeping an eye to see if the Capitol Police can share anything else on that.
All right, we'll continue to watch that as that develops. Meantime, Nandita, while the president's domestic agenda is largely in the spotlight, what is happening on the international front?
So several things, including Secretary of State who is in Paris, and he met with French President Macron today. This is a really awkward meeting between the Secretary of State and the French President after a minor diplomatic crisis that erupted between the United States and France last month over a security pact that involved the United States selling nuclear submarines to Australia, scuttling a deal that Australia had already signed with France for French submarines. France said that the move was a stab in the back. They even recalled their ambassador to the United States in an unprecedented step. Since then, obviously, the crisis has been contained to a certain extent after President Biden spoke with President Macron over the phone. So this visit by Secretary Blinken is the first in-person high-level meeting by a U.S. official since this whole rift erupted. So he is there really to rebuild ties and essentially bring the two countries together again. France is one of Washington's oldest and closest allies, and really bringing this relationship back to where it was is a high priority for Washington.
Yeah, let's talk about this a bit more. Philip, what is at stake politically here? Because this is one piece of a very complicated geopolitical picture.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you say what is at stake politically, I mean that sort of is rooted in this idea that Americans spend a lot of time focused on foreign policy, which I'm not sure is the case. I mean, certainly there was this downturn in President Biden's approval rating in the aftermath of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. It seems though that maybe rebounded somewhat. You know, there are certainly significant stakes for the country, but politically, I'm not sure that a lot of Americans are paying a lot of attention to the tension between the United States and France. I'm not sure that many people are particularly concerned about it. I think one of the things that we had seen over the course, when this first unfolded, was it seemed as though the French were a lot more upset about it than were the Americans, in part because of the nature of what unfolded. Politically, I'm not sure that it has significant repercussions. Is that ideal? That the American electorate may not respond to any significant degree with a crisis of this magnitude, to the extent that it's a crisis? That's probably not ideal, but I think it's reality.
All right, let's turn to domestic issues. Nicholas, on Monday, moderate Senator Kyrsten Sinema accused youth activists who followed her into a bathroom at Arizona State University of acting inappropriately. They confronted her over her opposition to the president's agenda. Now, the New York Times unearthed an incident from 2003 in which Sinema, then a social worker, organized a protest against then presidential hopeful Joe Lieberman for his support of the war in Iraq. Now, at the time, Sinema told the Hartford Courant, quote, "He's a shame to Democrats. I don't even know why he's running. He seems to want to get Republicans voting for him. What kind of strategy is that?" Nicholas, these days, that is a question many are asking Sinema herself. How have these negotiations highlighted her political evolution?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is the reality of being a Democratic senator in a purple state like Arizona. A lot of the anger about a senator like Lieberman, reflected the fact that he did come from what was a fairly blue state, where what he only would have to worry about would be pretty much token Republican opposition, and the real battle for his political future would be a primary against a Democrat to his left. Whereas with Sinema, she won Arizona by a relatively small margin. Biden also won Arizona by a small margin. It's not a blue state. And so in order to try to win over Republican voters, the bottom line is she has to take these positions in the center. And, clearly this sort of outrage from the progressive left is something that's unfazing the center, especially since it's a background that she came from herself.
Well, Philip, I want to play part of an interview in which you say Mike Pence demonstrates the challenge of living in both Trump world and reality.
A lot has been made over the disagreement you had with the president as it relates to January 6th. My sources, my understanding is that you two have a strong relationship to this day. What is your relationship with the president?
Look, you can't spend almost 5 years in a political foxhole without developing a strong relationship. And, January 6th was a tragic day in the history of our Capitol building. But I know the media wants to distract from the Biden administration's failed agenda by focusing on one day in January. They want to use that one day to try and demean the character and intentions of 74 million Americans who believed we could be strong again and prosperous again and supported our administration in 2016 and 2020.
Now, you write that since Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, quote, Republicans have been trying to figure out how to both agree with the base's incorrect belief that fraud was rampant, a belief stoked by Trump repeatedly, and to acknowledge that the belief as formulated is incorrect. Explain what you call the challenging reality for any Republican presidential hopeful.
Yeah, so we have the majority of Republicans believe Donald Trump's false assertions about there being rampant election fraud in the 2020 election. And so if you are running for office, not only are you expected to at least adhere to some extent to Donald Trump's assertions. But more often, what we're seeing is, at least based on the candidates who've already declared their primary intentions, you're expected to actually say, yes, I stand along with Donald Trump in this fight for election integrity, which of course is a fight against a boogeyman. It's a windmill at which they're tilting. And so if you are someone like Nikki Haley, for example, who's giving a speech this evening, who has said, I think there was fraud, just not enough to swing the election, that's sort of trying to find that middle ground between saying, yes, there was fraud that happened, which of course there was, although it was, amounted to basically 24 cases across the country, which is absolutely normal in elections, not ideal, but trying to say, yes, there was fraud, but, not enough, still remaining within reality by saying, well, there wasn't enough to swing the election. Of course, Pence is in a totally different space because he has been the target by Trump, including recently. I mean, they may be friends, according to Sean Hannity, but in late July, Trump was disparaging Pence for not having somehow overturned the election on January 6th, which of course he couldn't do. Pence is more so than probably anyone else in Republican politics torn between Trump world and the real world. And, he has to try and figure out how to navigate between them if he wants to win in 2024. I don't think he's going to be able to, and I don't think he's going to win in 2024.
All right, shifting gears, Nandita, on the immigration front, what is happening at the border town of Del Rio, Texas, after the administration moved to expel thousands of Haitian migrants?
Right, so the Biden administration has continued to deport Haitian migrants by the thousands. Several weeks into this deportation, mass deportations that we've been seeing, aid that was promised by the administration to NGOs on the ground in Haiti and UN agencies that have been helping these migrants, that aid has still not arrived. Which is a really bad look for the White House and this administration. Just to put this in context for your viewers, just between the 19th of September and the 1st of October, the Biden administration has deported 6,000 Haitian migrants back to a country that is facing a significant amount of upheaval and a humanitarian crisis following an earthquake and the assassination of the president of Haiti. So this is a really, really bad situation, a crisis in Haiti. And the administration had promised aid in September. The White House said that aid will be offered by USAID, about $5 million. And that aid has still not reached Haiti and is not helping resettle these Haitian migrants who are being sent back to their country.
A dire situation. Nicholas, on another topic, Democrats say they are preparing to offer a new compromise on voting rights legislation. What would it do and when could we see a vote?
Well, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said today that they would be moving forward on legislation named for the late Congressman John Lewis, a legendary leader within the Democratic Party and a civil rights activist at that. And what this legislation would do is essentially restore provisions of the landmark Voting Rights Act that were struck down by a Supreme Court case and include protections for minorities, about redistricting, polling lines, and other things that advocates really see as important to protecting the right to vote. The problem is that it doesn't look like there are going to be very many Republicans aboard on this legislation, let alone enough to break the 60-vote majority required for a filibuster. And so, this is really going to leave Democrats at square one, where they were with voting rights legislation all those months ago, with their landmark legislation, the For the People Act. Even if you've gotten all 50 Democrats aboard, that's not enough to get Republicans on. And this legislation looks like it's going to be pretty much stalled out for now. Yeah, it's something that I know activists have said they are going to continue to apply political pressure on lawmakers to do something about, because as you said, it's a very difficult political landscape that they're facing. Finally, Philip, former White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham recently spoke to CNN about the relationship between the Trump administration and Fox News. She said that by and large, Fox News, quote, didn't get tough with us. They just took what we were saying and disseminated it. What are some of the other claims that she's making, and are they able to be corroborated?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the ironies, of course, of Stephanie Grisham's new book is the fact that she has admitted saying false things in cable news interviews, saying false things to reporters. And, we must necessarily then take what she says with a grain of salt. Nonetheless, she is in a unique position. For all of the books that have come out about the Trump administration, there have been very few which have both been from someone as close to both the former president and the former first lady, and who is, someone who can be seen as being, at least to some extent credible in the stories that she's detailing. And so she's really outlined a sense of the White House and chaos under the Trump administration. I don't think that's a real surprise to people who were observing it, but she's also revealed some very personal things. She revealed, for example, in an essay for the Washington Post today, she admitted that she'd had a relationship with a man who's now running for Congress in Ohio with Donald Trump's endorsement, in which she says she was physically abused by him and assaulted by him, and that both Melania Trump and Donald Trump refused to do anything about it. And, again, in fact, Donald Trump actually went on to actually endorse him for Congress, this candidate Max Miller. So those sorts of revelations are very unique, and we haven't heard before. She has already had a dust up with House Minority Whip Steve Scalise, who claims that one of the allegations in the book was not true, and he's contesting that Melania Trump didn't come down and greet his family, which was a claim that was made in the book. So there are already these questions that are being asked, but it certainly is a novel insight from definitely a source who should be taken with a grain of salt. But when she makes assertions like Fox News just let the Trump administration say what they wanted, it's pretty hard to argue that that's obviously the case.
All right, Nicholas Wu, Nandita Bose, and Philip Bump, a wide-ranging discussion on a Tuesday. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.